The physical and psychological impacts of disasters don't necessarily end as the physical hazards subside. In many cases, the effects are more severe in some communities than they are in others. We'll talk with the leader of an organization that is focused on assisting communities that have traditionally been underserved in disasters on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. Research suggests that cultural minority populations, specifically African Americans and Latinos, have a greater risk of disaster exposure and are disproportionately affected by it. The higher risk among minority populations may result from lower levels of disaster education and preparedness, a lower risk perception, lower likelihood of evacuation, lower socioeconomic status, and a higher likelihood of residence in a poorly constructed home or in a community near other hazards where basic infrastructure may not be present: food, shelter, income. So a few years ago, a couple of emergency management practitioners, they noticed this and they formed what's called the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management. And it's an interesting conversation to talk about diversity and inclusion in a disaster. Some might suspect that it happens automatically, not necessarily. So again, not every community experiences and perceives and recovers even from a disaster the same way as another. But the Institute has for the last number of years been working to help these communities, often going in after disaster, sometimes going in before, to try to help communities recover and be the places that the folks actually want to live, work, and play. So there's a lot to cover here. And we're going to get right into it by the question that I ask my guests. And I'm fortunate to have the chief executive officer of this organization here. And so my first question is, who is Chauncia Willis?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Sure.
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I thought about it for a while. I'm a very spiritual person. So I think when I think about who I am, I see myself as a child of God first. I'm first and foremost someone that was created to bring, to support and to really bring my skills, gifts, and talents to the world in service. So I see myself as someone who's here on earth for a time, hopefully a long time, but someone who's been really put here for a purpose. And I think everyone has a purpose. And I'm just thankful that I've been given the honor to really work in an area that I'm very passionate about. So Chauncia is really one that wants to, use her life to serve. And I'm not very interesting beyond that. When I think about myself, I don't find myself very interesting, but but I think that's who I am. I'm Mary's daughter.
Right.
And so that's who I am.
Okay. And now, Mary's daughter is also the CEO of this organization called the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management. And we're going to dig into a little bit about what that is. But before we go there, I have to ask this one other question, and it doesn't require any pre-research. It's just the response that comes to you when you hear the term psychological health and safety. When you hear those words, what comes to mind for you when you hear that?
When I hear that, it acknowledges trauma for people of color and for people who've been marginalized. So when I think of that, I say there's a term that acknowledges the trauma that I've experienced and that other people who have been marginalized, people who have been excluded, people who have been looked upon differently. It acknowledges the pain that comes with living in this body, in this way, in this culture, in this society. And it acknowledges that pain. And so for a long time, I think people haven't acknowledged that pain. And I think we've been required to push through pain. And no one has actually acknowledged that, yeah, this is pretty tough. It's not easy. It's not easy. We make it look easy, but this is not easy. And so for me, it's just that acknowledgement, like, yeah, you matter enough that we actually have a term for it, for your trauma.
Wow. So share a little bit about, first of all, a little bit about your background in emergency management. So when I'll share for the listening audience, I didn't know that the Institute existed until a year or so ago, maybe a little bit less. And I stumbled across this group and reached out to them because I kind of do that. I find people I'm interested in. I reach out to them and say, hey, I know you may not know me. Well, come to find out. We actually had some interactions back in then. I got to be totally honest. You remembered me. And I go like,
oh yeah.
So when you get to have as many birthdays as me, you kind of forget about. And then I start going like, oh yeah, I remember. So tell us a little bit about your history in emergency management in general.
Yes. So I was a graduate student at Georgia State University. I'm from Florida originally, but I was in graduate school. And I met with Dr. William Waugh, and he was teaching disaster management, and I'd never even heard of that. So he said, you seem really interested. You'd be the only student I have that's interested. So would you like to do an internship at the Atlanta Fulton County Emergency Management Agency? And I said, yes, absolutely. Sign me up. And so he, spoke to Pansy Ricks, and I think LaVon McCord at the time was the director. And they brought me in as an intern. And after 6 weeks, I said, I'd like to compete for a full-time position. And they started me off at $17,000. And so I was happy for it, even with a graduate degree. And that wasn't that many years ago, maybe 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I guess. But all the talk and all the talk of the town was this new fire chief that was coming in all the way from Seattle. And that was in the news. That was the talk of the town. Everyone was like, what's he going to be like? I believe at the time I had been there for quite a while, and my former boss was Chief Archie Strong, and he passed away. And so he was the former fire chief for Atlanta, city of Atlanta, I believe. And so the new chief was coming in, and it was going to be a guy all the way from Seattle with all this education, and he was just hot stuff. So everyone was nervous. Everyone was like, oh Lord, when is he coming in? And then one day they had a big presentation, and you walked in and everyone was like, here he is. Everybody look straight ahead. And you came into the front of the room, and I remember you were so kind. You were like, hey, everybody. I was like, wait a minute. Everyone's anticipating. And you came right to the back and you said, young lady, I need you to put together a presentation for me very quickly. And I said, me? Okay, I know PowerPoint. I'll do that. And you wanted a presentation, and it was something around fire service and what your intentions were. And it was very telling for me, because I said, he's the first fire chief I've worked for, because I worked for quite a few, that actually knew PowerPoint. He actually knows what he's doing. So that's how we originally met. You needed something done with PowerPoint, and you knew technology well enough to actually say, "Do this for me, please." I was like, "What? He knows what a presentation is. Oh my God, this is different."
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, you were the talk of the town, very excited. Everyone was anticipating your arrival, and you came in and you were so organized and so technology focused and just innovative. And we hadn't seen that before.
Well, yeah, you bring back some memories. So actually, Chief Strong was my predecessor at Fulton County. He was in it. He was in the city of Atlanta, and he got the fire chief's position in Fulton County, and then he had moved over to emergency management a little bit before I got there, and I only met him a handful of times because he passed away. I'd only been there for a few months. As a matter of fact, I remember going to the hospital where his predecessor was in the hospital, and they said he didn't have long to live. And I left there and went to see Chief Strong, and was the last day I saw both of them. Wow. And so it left me trying to run this. I'd never been a fire chief before. I'd been an assistant, but never got really the opportunity. And this kind of is an interesting connection because in Seattle, was often I was too young. I felt like I was old enough and I had the education experience and all that type of thing. But, in that system, unless you've been around for 40 years, you just weren't old enough quite yet. Mm-hmm. So I also didn't have anybody to bounce things off of or to ask. Kind of had to figure it out on my own. And so thanks for those. Right. I was really nervous. I tried to hide it fairly well, but I had no idea what I was doing because nobody really showed me how to do it. So you spent some time, working in Atlanta, Fulton County Emergency Management. And I imagine there's a lot of stories to tell about how that worked in some cases and may not have worked in others. And at some point you decide that, you want to try your craft someplace else. So I think you moved on from Atlanta, Fulton County to
GEMA, Georgia Emergency Management.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. And being at the state. Yeah. So the state does an interesting thing where they did at that time where they would recruit from the local departments. And so I was there, and in Atlanta, I had created a GIS division, Geographic Information Systems division. I had rewritten all the plans. I was just doing my thing, and the state kind of heard about it. They said, "Come over to the state," and I delayed for a year because obviously when the city didn't want to lose that talent, so they were like, "We'll give you more money." So I said, "Okay, I'll stay a little longer," but then eventually I did go over, and I only stayed with the state for maybe less than a year. When I was at the state of Georgia, it's an interesting situation there. The first thing I noticed, because I came in there from Atlanta, the first thing I noticed was that only white people went on deployments. I couldn't figure out why Black people weren't allowed to go, because you get extra money and experience, which allows you to get more promotion. So immediately I saw an issue. And so I said something about it. And so that was my first, we had just gotten a new director. I think Gary McConnell had been the director for a long time, but then they brought in a guy named Mike Scherberger. And he was, not familiar as much with emergency management. So I went to him and I said, "Director Scherberger, I'm new here, and I think you are too. We're both new, but I have an issue. I don't see where people of color and women are allowed to go, but no one of color is allowed to deploy. And I want deployment experience." And, I was very, open about that. And so he said, "I didn't realize that was an issue until you said something." So that taught me my first lesson. If you don't say something, it might not be known.
Right.
And number two, don't waste time going to anybody that's not able to make a decision. So he was able to make a decision very quickly. And so he said, well, you know what? There's a hurricane coming into North Carolina. They've requested EMAC assistance. Be ready to go within 12 hours. So I knew enough not to ask any questions, like what kind of shoes, I didn't ask any questions. I was like, I'll be ready.
Right. Right.
And I was out. So
Right.
that was my first deployment. And it was significant because a lot of the other people that had been there a while, they say, you know, what is she doing? How did she get to go?
Mm.
And so I said, well, you know what? Let's all go. Be prepared and ready next time. Let's all go, because there's no reason we shouldn't go. It's not rocket science. If it was rocket science, none of the people I've seen deploying would have been. Okay. And I certainly wouldn't be there either. So just be ready. And so, you know, that was kind of my experience there. And one of the things they would do at Georgia is Georgia EM is they would require that the planners teach courses in how to plan. So, you know, that was my thing. I would teach people how to go into communities and develop plans, how to coordinate with multiple groups to develop quality plans that had teeth, not paper tigers.
Right.
And so I just had a knack for it. I loved teaching it. And I loved demonstrating the value of having diverse community members there, because I'd worked in Atlanta. I understood you got to have that diversity, or else the plan isn't really valid. It doesn't work for the people. So the plan has to work for the people.
Right.
And so you're coming to write for them. And so if their plan is meaningless, then your plan means nothing either. You know, it just doesn't do anything in times of disaster. It's chaos, and you want to mitigate chaos, reduce chaos. So, you know, I stayed there for a while, teaching plans and writing the state hurricane plans, emergency plans, repatriation plans, and, you know, just writing the plans and getting all that stuff together. And I got a call from a Beltway bandit. They said, Chauncia, it's time to join the consulting world. And so that's what I did. They offered me, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times as much money as what the state was paying, because, you know, state doesn't pay.
Right.
And so I said, okay, well, I'll see y'all later. Bye.
So let me pull on that thread a bit. Do you think that the state could have done something to keep you there if it was important enough to them? Do you think they could have?
They could have, but one thing I do recall feeling there is I always felt out of place. So I never felt like I belonged. And so there have been a few jobs where I felt like I totally belonged. But I didn't feel like I belonged there. I felt like I was radical, like I had different thoughts, like I felt like the way I thought was different. My specific team was very diverse. We had people I'm still friends with, ironically. Another African American young lady was on my team. We had 2 LGBTQ plus who had adopted children of different races. And so we were just kind of like a very diverse team. Everyone kind of knew that we were that unit. So we kind of always stuck out. We stuck very closely together, went to lunch together, did everything together, and we just never fit together. So I was happy to go. I met a lot of friends, and I keep, you know, in touch with a lot of people there. But I was happy to go. I just didn't feel like I belonged there.
That is an important point, because that is at the heart of what I talk about every week. This feeling that, and so there's the concept out there of psychological safety. Can you be yourself, not somebody else? Can you bring your whole self? Can you bring your ideas, your perspective, your view, your whatever, and contribute to whatever the organization is doing? And unfortunately, there are a lot of places the answer is no. The answer is no. And I believe the answer is no because it's not important enough. Because if you were to sit any of those people down right now and ask them, oh, do you want to have a diverse workforce? Do you want to have people feel safe? They'll say, oh, of course we do. Until it comes time to actually doing something about it. Because the talk is great. I mean, it sounds wonderful. And again, you're also another example of someone, they'll go out and recruit people. Oh, yeah, we got to get that person. And they bring great skills until you get there and find out that the culture is not really established to cause it to feel like home. And you used a word called belonging. Mm-hmm. And that is, the inclusion is one thing. Belonging is something altogether different. And it doesn't always work out that way. So you do a little bit of consulting. Get me closer. What happens after the consulting? Because I seem to recall you ended up back in government there for a second.
I did. I was working for a number of different consulting companies, and my last assignment was with the CDC, Centers for Disease Control. And I was just going through a tough time. With that particular contract, they were wanting us to downsize. So I was going to have to let people go. I did not want to do that. And so I got a call actually from the city of Tampa, and it was the fire chief there. And he said, "I hear you're from St. Petersburg, Florida." I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Would you like to come home?" And I had been praying about going back home for a while. And so he said, "Would you like to come home?" And when I tell you, I didn't even know what the position was they were looking for. I didn't know the salary. I said, yes. He said, "Well, you know what? Come interview for this position." And I went and I interviewed for the position. And once again, I didn't really know what the position was. They said emergency coordinator, but I hadn't really seen a job description. So I wasn't familiar with the term. And I remembered a year before I had applied for all these jobs. But then I transitioned to a different job. So I didn't really remember what I had applied for. So I had no idea what the job was. And I got the job there, and I moved. And I just went back to working in government, local government. And they needed my skill set in terms of building an emergency management program. They wanted to build one. And they wanted one that was separate from the county. So it had to be a radical program that was in your face. We're going to take what's ours. And so that's the approach they wanted. And I was game for it because, it's my approach anyway. Okay, I'm going to take it if it's on the table. If anybody can have it, I'll take it. So, and the strength of any emergency management program is in the support it has of the politicians. And so to get that program to where it could stand on its own, it took a lot of political savvy. And it took a lot of support from within the city. The county wasn't as supportive, obviously, because who wants to, support an upstart program that is essentially going to take all of the major events back? Super Bowl, Bollywood, all of those things are now fully led by the city, whereas before they were more led by the county. And so with me coming in and really having the force of the mayor behind me and so many others from the city, we reclaimed a lot of things that, and it definitely ruffled feathers, but it allowed me to be creative, and it allowed me to grow. And it taught me a lot about humility, not expecting to always have everything work out perfectly. It doesn't. Sometimes you fall flat on your face in public. And, being a Black woman, as soon as I walk out the door, there are stereotypes assigned to me already. The bias is already there. So, learning that I have to not be, that I can't be the angry Black woman. I can't express anger. I can't express confusion. I have to know everything at all times. I have to look the part. I have to sound the part. I have to do everything in a way that puts everyone at ease. I had my boss, one of my bosses, one of the chiefs, tell me, you're intimidating. You're very intimidating.
Imagine
that.
And I
still don't know what that means, because I'm not intimidating.
Well, let me share something I heard once. Lack of confidence looks at confidence and calls confidence intimidating.
Oh, see, there we go.
And there is nothing wrong with being confident in what you know, and also being confident in what you don't. I mean, but for some people, that's a challenge for them. But it's really more a reflection on them than it is on the person that they say they're intimidated by.
Right. Right. I agree.
Just a thing. So a little bit of local government. So local government, state, out in the consulting world, back at the municipal level. So where does this institute thing come up? Where does that? How does that come about?
Well, the institute came from. I will tell you this. I was actually. I was experiencing a lot of discrimination in Tampa. I was having a lot of, just challenges. I mean, just a lot of challenges. I was just having a lot of problems with, we got a new fire chief and he was white and he did not, they did things like I had a nice size office and I came in one day, they had put my office into a closet, cleaned out a closet, and put all my stuff in there and said, this is your new office.
Okay.
I said, okay, why did that happen? Well, it happened because his best friend was the assistant fire chief and they wanted him to have the office closest to the chiefs.
Okay.
So, and they didn't value emergency management. They didn't value me. They felt like there shouldn't be a woman on the executive staff that looked like me, that was not a sworn. So it was just so many. Every day it was just something new. I knew when I showed up, I would get nervous because every day there was something new. Mm. And so I hear this from a lot of women and a lot of women of color, but you just don't know, because once you become a target, you are a target. Like you said, you were celebrated when you came in because you're bringing all this knowledge and education and ideas, and you can back it up. But eventually you get to the person that says, well, I don't like all those new ideas. Mm. I don't like that she knows all those people. I don't like that when this happens, the White House calls her. Why are they calling her? Mm. They should be calling, if anybody should call. And so I would say, well, I just happen to know this person. I just happen to know that person. And so it became an issue, though. Even with the mayor, it became an issue. Like, there's too much she's got too much going on over there. But that is I think sometimes there's a favor that certain women of color have. People understand we know pain, so they connect with us a little easier. Mm. Mm. So IDEUM came from a place of absolute need. I needed to have an outlet. I needed to have something to balance the playing field. Not only was I experiencing all of this discrimination and bias, and I would go home and cry. I was tormented. And, no one really understood why. People would say, why did they treat you so badly? I didn't have a response. I don't know. And so I created IDEUM not only out of my own personal experiences, but when I would go out and when I would create programs for lower income communities, our government, the municipal government, they wouldn't support it. No, they wouldn't support it. When I would, be intentional in creating opportunities like disaster preparedness on a budget. Hey, I need this to go on the website so we can show people how to, get prepared with who don't have a lot of money. And we don't need that on the website. No, Chauncia. That's not. I created an entire program where I had business communities donating money and supplies and warehouse space for lower income families. You would think that would be supported. It was, I would even say it was absolutely diminished as much as it could be so that it would not be effective. Wow. So those are some of the things where, I said to myself, I have to have an organization that can address these needs. And I was invited to speak at a leadership conference for emergency managers, National Leadership Conference. It was mostly FEMA and, other national EM and disaster relief organizations. And they had me there with other FEMA administrators and regional administrators and some other state leaders. And I was first. And I was only there because I was in Tampa and the conference was in Tampa. So they thought they should invite me. And so I spoke and they said, talk about whatever you want. And I talked about the discrimination and bias that exists in emergency management and how people don't really have the compassion that's necessary to be servant leaders and to serve these communities that are very diverse. And I talked about how I had listened to the conversations in the EOCs and on deployments when people were talking about people of color as if they were bothersome. But these are the people that were impacted by the disaster. Why are they trying to defraud the government? But these major corporations, you have nothing to say about them. I guess their level of fraud is too complicated, too complex and technical for you to comment on. But your assumption that all of these people of color are trying to defraud the government is astonishing, to the point where they were making jokes about, I wouldn't give them another dime. I wouldn't give them another dime. They're just going to buy 40 ounces with it. And they would just start laughing. They just thought that was so funny, and other very racist jokes like that. And it would burn me up. I'm like the only person of color sitting there. So I'm thinking I can't fight the whole room. So what is the best strategy? Well, my strategy was I'm going to create something that is going to have impact and that will fight for the woman that doesn't have a voice, the single mom that you're laughing at, the person who wants to work, but they're unemployed. And you're joking about his lack of financial wherewithal. Not only that, but you're assuming he's a criminal. And so all of these things, I don't want to say I was enraged, but I was more like, as I spoke to them, I talked about it. I talked about what I've heard. I've talked about the lack of compassion, the lack of empathy, the fact that you don't understand how it feels to be ashamed of the experience you've just had, because the people that have come to help you, they don't like you. They look at you, they don't want to touch you. They don't want to really, they don't really want to help you. They want pictures helping you, but they don't really want to get your life back on track. And someone said while I was speaking, they said, we saw a glow around you, Chauncia. I was into it. I was like, and the only thing that stopped me is I heard someone weeping in the audience. Oh. I actually heard someone crying. And I paused and I said to the moderator, I said, I think I've run out of time. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, I must have taken too much time. And I looked at the time and it was way more time than I should have had. But she turned to me and she said, keep talking. So I said, okay. I said, well, let me tell you then about life and not being one of the ones that gets lucky with the lottery. If you don't get lucky and if you don't win the lottery in looks and privilege and all this stuff, then you are not going to get the same treatment. I need you to know that you are bringing your bias to these disasters, and it's not right. You're bringing all of your stereotypical mindsets, your bias, even in these grant decisions. You're denying grants because of spelling errors. I've seen you do it. Because the syntax isn't correct, you deny it. They don't even know how to spell. Well, they couldn't afford to get a consultant to write it for them. So your empathy, even in these funding decisions, is not there. And this is major because you're bringing bias to every area of emergency management. And now we're going into climate change impacts. And this is the same population that's going to be disproportionately impacted. They're going to feel it the worst, but they didn't cause it.
That's right.
All of these impacts, they didn't cause it, but they're going to feel it, and you're going to make it worse with the bias. And so by the time I was done, I think I went on for a long time. And so I felt better getting it off my chest. So
Sure.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
I even while you're telling that story, it just brings up some thoughts for me. I don't know how many people I even shared this with, to be honest, but so I deployed with one of the urban search and rescue task forces to Oklahoma City for the bombing. And I was with the Seattle Fire Department at the time. I got promoted to battalion chief the same day, April 19th, 1995. 8 days later, we got deployed. And I was the only chief officer deployed. But I might as well have been, janitor. Because the folks who were lead, I outranked them, but I didn't out-influence them.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure I was the only Black person on the entire team. And it was made up of Seattle, King County, and Pierce County, the two counties, two really big counties in Seattle area. And I will never forget going into one of the restrooms and seeing the N-word on the stall in the restroom. And, and so who was I going to tell that to? I mean, who was that? Who was I going to share that with? How that made me feel? But the reason I share that is your description of how someone in the audience was in tears. What you just summed up when you talked about grant funding decisions and how people make the jokes and all that, that is in many cases every aspect of safety in this country. Because so people look at these as two different things. I don't. Safety starts at very basic levels and goes all the way up through emergency management. It's a safety thing. It's how do we keep people safe? How do we keep them, comfortable and taken care of, both physically and emotionally? And I think that gets lost. And again, I've been around, my mom's a very compassionate person. I tell people I'm compassionate because I came up around her. So I don't want to believe that all of these people are simply evil and racist. Some of them are, but I don't believe all of them are. But the system itself was not created to take care of everyone. It wasn't. It was designed. Often it was designed by a group of white men who sit in the room and came up with whatever it is. And again, I'm not saying they're all bad people. I'm just saying they didn't lack the perspective of people who are poor. I was raised on public assistance. Our family was on public assistance when I graduated high school. And I'll never forget so those are still my people. They still are. They still are. Yeah. They still are. And somebody, it seems to me, and particularly when we're talking about situations where entire communities are devastated, the very people we say this is for aren't the ones who actually get help.
No,
they don't get any help. The help goes to some big corporation, somebody who has a consultant, somebody who has a political influence. They've already got plenty. And many of these communities, after disasters, the indigenous, native, whoever, the people who were there get wiped out.
Mhm.
and a bunch of other people with a lot more money show up and just move them out, take their land, take their
Mhm.
hard-earned investments, and I think it's sad.
It's
I
very sad.
I think it's sad. I really do.
It's
Yeah.
very sad. It's very intentional. That, they have a new term, climate gentrification, and it speaks to that, like in Miami, Little Haiti, Little Havana, and, where the idea is the sea level rise is impacting the coastal areas to the point where, the coastal communities, all these big hotels and all these fancy houses, they're now below sea level.
Mm.
And so it's only getting worse. But the people that formerly occupied those areas were people of color, and they were pushed inland. Well, now they're 12 feet above sea level, all of those communities. And guess what? Now there's an intentional push to retake that from those underserved communities, to take that and to push them out. And they are able to do it through increased rents, through insurance. They're able to do it by having huge developments, come in, and those big developments where the people who are there, they can't afford to live there. So now you're gentrifying the area that you consider the worst lands of all. And now there's a push to take it all back. And it's happening all over America.
Mm.
And it infuriates me on so many levels, because you're pushing people around. You're taking land from people that, you already took the original land. Now you're taking it again for your benefit.
Right.
And it's just, it's just that concept of the system has been created to ensure that certain people are expendable, that they don't really matter as much as other people, not their lives, not their children's lives, not their, nothing attributed to them, associated with them, matters as much as it does for these people over here.
So these experiences again lead you to form the institute, and so now what is it like? Well, so take folks who haven't heard about what take us inside what it's like for the institute to be deployed. How does it work now? And what is it like going into these communities that have been left behind and forgotten about? What is that like now?
Well, the term, the psychological health and safety, for real, that's a real thing, because that is acknowledging the trauma. When you go into communities before, during, or after a disaster, as emergency managers, as people who work in disaster response, emergency response, to a certain extent, you're psychologically prepared. And, that brings me to a point too. I remember learning about years ago, and I think I was listening to your presentation while you were working in Atlanta, and you were talking about how there are going to be a certain amount of casualties. You understand that, and you're prepared for a certain amount of casualties associated with disasters, and you factor that in. But that's a mental trick that you do. You prepare yourself for what you might see and what the losses might be. We do the same thing. The only challenge, I think, for us is that the losses are not necessarily always losses in life. Sometimes it's the loss in the recovery. You are just not going to recover. We have created a system, an idiom called determinants of recovery, based on the determinants of health, based on the community and what it's already experiencing, what situation it's in. We do a demographic assessment before we deploy our equity response teams into a disaster. We try to understand the community as much as possible before we even show up. And we already know we can pretty much pinpoint where the linchpins are going to be, where it's going to be an issue. For example, with Hurricane Ian here in Florida, we knew that the migrant communities would be the communities least assisted, mainly because not only of the politics of Florida, but also because of the undocumented status, and also because of the geographic location, because there is a certain thing as geographic bias. When you're in a rural area, you may not get as much support. And so you won't get as much support, certainly not as quickly, unless there's intentional effort to provide it to you. So Hurricane Ian, we knew that the migrant farming community, those Hondurans, Jamaicans, those just a rich dichotomy, a rich diversity of people, we knew that they would not receive the support because of the priority on the social scale. And so we're very realistic about it. Okay, you're not very familiar with the language. Okay, you can go ahead and put that on there. That's going to be one factor that's going to work against you. Okay, you don't have a great connection with the community. Okay, it's going to work against you too. Oh, you're in a rural area, that too. And so we know, okay, well, this community is the one we just need to go speak to some people. Let's go talk to them now and see what we can do to help this group. And sure enough, it was that group that was in need of the most support. So that's how we decide where to deploy, when to deploy. It's based on the perceived exclusion and lack of resource support and lack of support in recovering that draws us there.
Wow. Oh, wow. So you particularly focus on those who have been left out, underserved, not taken care of. So I'm under no illusion. At least I don't believe that IDM is big enough to help everybody. So IDM is a nonprofit. So how are you able to continue doing what you're doing? I mean, do you have the federal or state governments that bring you in, or how does that part work? How do you find out or get actually deployed? How does that work?
Well, many times it's just through our own funding, internal funding. For Hurricane Ian, I mean, we reserve our vehicles and we take our teams out. We have support from like Airbnb. They're always interested in finding housing for us within the communities because they know the work we're doing. So they will provide, vouchers for housing. In other scenarios, organizations and foundations will hear about what we're doing and they will reach out and say, we want to support that. How can we support that? How can we donate to keep this going? They will see, like we did a report on MSNBC talking about the issues and, that was very helpful. That was very helpful to promote, helping underserved communities. And they did that for us. So they provided us with that exposure, which allowed more resources to flow into the organization. But I wish we could help everyone. But, what we have started doing is assisting organizations in putting together their own teams, and we train them if they would like to be trained. Mm-hmm. So we're doing as much as we can, trying to cover as much ground as we can to help as many people as we can.
Yeah, there is, at least in my opinion anyway, no end in sight to the emergency management, safety related concerns in this country. There's no end in sight because we've spent so many years doing it incorrectly. So many years leaving communities under-resourced, poor infrastructure, poor economic supports. We've got centuries of backlog, and there are lots of reasons why a lot of this goes on. And so there's just such a need for organizations such as yours to go into communities and help after the fact, but also to help before the fact. So I really like what you were just suggesting about being able to train people in advance, you know, and I mentioned that a little bit in the kind of opening monologue, that I honestly believe that a lot of these communities that are so impacted so severely, I should say, after a disaster, it was predictable. That's my observation about the pandemic.
Absolutely.
The pandemic didn't change much of anything, but it exposed most of everything. It was already bad. There was already an issue. People are already struggling to begin with. And the pandemic simply tipped them over the edge. It put that business that was struggling out of business. It took that person that was already sick and infirm, and it took their life. So it just exposed a lot. So I really think it's important that we start to have conversations about what can we do to prevent some of this, because I don't know if all of it can be fixed, all the things that are broken. But what can we do? So can you share a little bit about, as an emergency manager, as a professional, as a person concerned about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what kinds of thoughts and ideas can you share with folks about this can be better if you do some of these things? And what would some of those things be?
Well, it could be a lot better for a lot of people if, number one, changing the mindset, because the way that we've been taught to think about emergency management is to do the most for the most. It's a utilitarian mindset. Do the most for the most. Of course, that doesn't account for those who have the least that are caught in the gap, right? They will not have access to resources. And so you're providing a lot of resources to those that already have resources. To get to the resources, you got to already have resources. You got to have a car to get over there to that dispensing site, to get to those, recovery centers, So when we are intentional about acknowledging the needs of the least, those who have the least, I should say, then we will actually begin doing the most for everyone. Then everyone has a fair chance. Because if there's a storm today and you have homeowners insurance, and I don't have homeowners insurance, only one of us is actually going to recover. So the system is not built for both of us to recover. And we have to acknowledge that. Okay, so if we know that, then you as a homeowner that has insurance, you should not be the one that I prioritize as an emergency manager.
Okay.
As an emergency manager, we have to be taught differently. It's not doing the most for the most. If they are already fully equipped for the homeowner's insurance, they have a generator. I hear it. When I come into certain neighborhoods and I hear the generators, I say, turn around. This isn't the one. They're going to be okay. They have generators. Okay. Where are the people who don't have generators? It's quiet. They're standing outside, sitting on the porch, sitting on crates, and they're looking off into space. The kids are looking off, and those are the people that are worried. They don't know where the next meal is coming from. And if the next meal comes to them, do they have resources, electricity to cook it? No, they have no generators. They have none of the basics. So as emergency managers, we have to prioritize those who do not have the access to those resources. And we have to make them a priority. So it's a mindset shift. It's a change in how we're taught to be effective emergency managers. And I would say, in addition to that, it's also prioritizing doing planning in advance. A lot of our plans, even those that are mandated by the state, they don't require a community assessment. They don't require a vulnerability assessment. They're looking at vulnerabilities in terms of census data. But who within your community does not have access to financial resources if their current day-to-day situation is interrupted? Have you connected with those organizations, those community-based organizations providing social services? Do you have a list, a manifest? Do you understand where the community centers are Have you made them a priority before you meet with this association, the real estate association, all these other ones they require that you meet with? Talk to them. Find those community-based organizations. What do we need to provide in advance, okay, to support your operation? I know for one disaster here in Tampa, we have an organization called Metropolitan Ministries. They provide food to the elderly. I'm making that call. Do you have generators? Do you have enough vehicles to continue providing services? Were your vehicles impacted? This is a new way of doing emergency management. You're taking care of the people instead of taking care of the policies and mandates. Take care of the people. So a lot of this happens too with communities that are excluded from receiving training. You know, as emergency managers, we train all the time. We go out into communities, we provide free, training, whether it's on disaster preparedness, ICS, we do all kinds of training. But rarely do we go into communities that don't look like us and say, hello, I'm your emergency manager. I need to provide your community with training. How are you organized? Oh, well, we're a very religious community, so everyone's connected to a church. Is there an association that I could speak to where I could provide disaster training, preparedness training in advance of a disaster? Okay, well, we speak Haitian Creole. It's okay. We have interpreters. We can provide you, or we can pay someone from your community to provide services, interpretation services for us. We're going to do whatever it takes to support your becoming better prepared as a community. And not only that, but we'll be back again if anyone misses it. That's the kind of stuff we should be doing as emergency managers. And we don't.
Well,
we don't do
other people don't. You do. You do.
Thank you. Yes, that's true.
The system may not do it because, again, what I hear when I listen to you talk about this is every single solitary thing we do to keep human beings safe, it could benefit from this same perspective.
Right.
So, so again, we teach first aid CPR classes to people who've had the class 12 times. And we have communities and who are all relatively healthy, no cardiac problems in that group. They're a bunch of industrial athletes, but we're going to go out there and repeat the same thing. And we've got communities with people who are already infirmed,
yep,
who are already weakened for some. And interestingly, even for those who would do this for the money, don't you see the benefit of preventing these folks are right on the edge from falling off the cliff?
Right.
Because to go back and fix that, I live in a community now that has been historically underinvested in as it relates to physical infrastructure, sewer and roads and traffic lights and all those kinds of things, sidewalks and all that. Well, guess what? Now you got to pay 3 times as much to fix it. It could have been fixed 20 years ago for whatever the prices were. Now you still have to fix it when you decide you want to live here. So it seems to me that if we were more focused on simply, particularly creating a floor for everybody, no one should fall below this. It doesn't have to be super complicated. I really like, when you talked about, emergency management for folks on a budget. I heard this some years ago, and I'm watching our time, but I heard someone say years ago that we should be, from an emergency management perspective, assuming that we're preparing everyone as if they were unhoused. Everybody. Because most of our approaches are these middle to upper middle class kind of approaches. Oh, yeah, get a week of this. And, you got to get you. There are folks, those are the folks who are going to be left behind, the ones who I'm not sure where my next meal is coming from.
Exactly.
I'm not sure how I'm going to get my medications. And again, ultimately, to fix all of that, and often what happens is there's a big disaster, something bad happens, and we feel guilty as a society. So we throw a bunch of money at it. So it'll
guilt
look
money,
good. Guilt money, but it doesn't really solve anything. And we don't help near as many people. We could have taken half that money 3 weeks ago and simply helped people in advance. And it would have been money better spent.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree.
Right.
The whole concept of those disaster preparedness kits, I'm like you. I grew up my mom raised 3 girls by herself. And, you know, I could remember coming home sometimes and we didn't have electricity. We didn't have lights, sometimes the water didn't turn on. And this wasn't long ago, you know what I mean? So the empathy you develop for other people, that's still my affinity group. I still understand those who don't have enough to eat. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to be hungry the entire day. And I can understand. So we need, honestly, more diversity in emergency management to have that perspective, to have people who really can empathize with people who are not covered by the system. They're not under the umbrella. The system was intended, the way the laws are written, it was intended to work for those who have a house, who have landowners. It was intended to work effectively for those who have privilege. Those who have privilege. The normative standard in America's policies is of a white Anglo-Saxon Christian cisgender male. So it's for a white male who identifies as a heterosexual and who has a name that sounds Anglo-Saxon, so not an Italian or Irish sounding name. And so you can, or Jewish sounding name, you can dig into all of these things and really understand how these policies were crafted. And they weren't intended to work for everyone. So when we say, gosh, you know what? The system is broken. It's not broken. It was crafted this way. And you always say this, you say it's working as it was created to work, as it was meant to work. And it is very effective.
Yes. So as we conclude this conversation that, as I say, could just go on and on. For those folks out there, again, who have listened to the passion that you've shared just in this conversation we've had and heard your story and the stories of others, and I hadn't heard of this IDM. What is that thing? And they haven't heard of it. And they're out there listening right now, and they want to help. They want to do something to support what you're doing. So share with me, if you will, how people can get a hold of you, how people who are interested in what you're doing can help you.
I will. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you. Yes. So if you want to learn more about IDEM, you can find more information by visiting i-diem.org. i-diem.org. We have a website that gives you a lot of information and resources. If you would like to donate, we have online giving. So if you'd like to donate, go to i-diem.org/kindful. And that will allow you to actually donate to our organization directly. If you'd like to reach out and talk to us, because we love to talk to people. I think we spend half our time in meetings sometimes and on the phone and just, hearing different stories and hearing different things. So reach out to us at info@i-diem.org. Once again, that's info@i-diem.org. Visit with us, email us. Chat with us. We'd love to hear from you, especially if there's an issue happening that you'd like to see addressed. We are very much interested in that. So thank you.
Well, Chauncia Willis, CEO and co-founder of the Institute for Diversity and Inclusion in Emergency Management. I have been so honored to have this conversation with you. I will reinforce, as you said, it would be wonderful that for people that are listening right now to think about how they can help. As a matter of fact, the community that you help today may be helping you tomorrow. So it's an opportunity to really, and this affects all of us. We only have one planet right now that we inhabit, that we know about. And so we have to do everything we can to make this as livable a place as possible for as many as possible. And for those who tune into these episodes every week or whenever you get the opportunity, thanks a lot for listening. This particular episode will be released during Women's History Month, and it's just wonderful to have another important person who's doing great things for our planet who just happens to be a woman. So again, thanks very much, and thanks for you who've listened in. We'll look forward to having another conversation on our next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much for joining us. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.